We're back in a Gunners Club.
You're back in the Gunners Club with Gunner and with Seuss. And if you like what we do, and we've got some great videos, recently one on the economy and a fantastic one on the vaping industry in Australia, go back, have a look, like and subscribe. Join us for these adventures. Now, joining us, Seuss, not just us in the Gunners Club today, but also a good friend of ours, I think you might see.
Man with a great hairdo.
Now, love him or hate him, let me introduce to you the 45th President of the United States, and possibly to come again the 47th. Now, a very polarizing figure, but today we're going to discuss who exactly is Donald Trump. Who is Donald Trump? Well, for me, if I'm going to use, let's say, a boxing analogy, what we've got here is someone who loves being in the ring, a scrappy fighter, a brawler, someone who's always got his hands cupped to his ears, so Hulk Hogan style, he can listen to the call of the fans and perform.
Oh my word, yes. And he loves the fight.
And loves the game. Now this brings me back to politics in Australia in the early 80s when we had world's greatest treasurer, who later became Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating, and what a brawler and a scrappy fighter he was on the floor of Parliament.
The Banana Republic.
There was a great quote that he said about Australian industry and eventually would have nothing but growing and selling bananas. Well, the economy in Australia has changed slightly. We provide massages to each other above and below the table, as well as making lattes for each other. That's about that. But further to politics and this style of fighting, I'm also thinking of that character Chopper Read. Now, whether you've seen Eric Bana play Chopper Read at the cinema, or you've seen some of the crime stories about him in Australian TV, this was a gangster, an inmate, who basically triumphed over everybody in Pentridge and in the cells because he decided that he loved being in prison. He decided that was his cosmos, that was his game. Whilst most people were looking out at, the sun through the bars, he was enjoying his time there and not figuring on getting out.
Yeah, that's right. He wasn't looking for the countdown to get out. He loved it in there.
He wanted to be up and inside of everybody there and inside their heads as well. And by being able to do that, he was able to take them down.
Yes.
And in a way, that's quite a good analogy, I think, for Donald Trump. Now, a very polarizing figure, but a person who goes with his gut. As a businessman, he's said in the art of the game, things might look good on paper, but the thing is to go with your gut. He's a person as well who admitted in that book that it pays sometimes to be a little bit wild. Now, a little bit wild he was. He talked about his success in business, saying it's funny how when you become successful, the banks come to you wanting to lend you their money. Must be because they know that he's a good bet. Well, he did put 6 companies into bankruptcy, so I don't know how good a bet that actually was. Now, you can tell a lot about a person by what's going through their mind, their behaviour, and also their long-term policies. So let's go through a little bit about that. How would we get to know the mind of Donald Trump? I mean, it's not as though he goes to bed writing what's going through his mind. But wait, in fact, he does. You might remember as president that he had access to his Twitter account.
That's right.
And he would tweet at all sorts of random hours of the morning and of the night, all sorts of things. Now, these were things actually which I think a person in control of the button really perhaps should think twice before tweeting. Now, these tweets regarding COVID, for example.
But he had the bigger button.
So he did in response to Kim Jong-un, who he decried as Rocket Man. He said to remember that he has a button too, his is a lot bigger, and that his works. Now, this was sent out at some random hour by his tweet account.
Yes.
An interesting way of forging diplomacy. Of course, he had his comments regarding COVID and saying that it was overstated the severity. Don't get me started on what my personal thoughts are regarding that. But also, alas, later he was impeached for inciting insurrection at the Capitol as well. And that's something which he encouraged, for sure, using his tweeter. So we have an idea of what goes through his mind. It's often said that he's motivated by his gut reaction and by personal grievances that he has. Now, I can understand the idea of there being personal grievances. There is what he's described as the weaponization of the law against him.
Yes.
Now, we can see that by the fact that there's only been 3 presidents impeached in US history. First one was Andrew Johnson in 1868. Later on, of course, we had the famous dress and Bill Clinton.
There were 2 persons in that room at the time. Although you can't see the young female.
Now, but Donald Trump is the only one to have in fact been impeached 3 times. Now, he was impeached, which means that the action was taken through the House of Representatives, but in both counts it was not endorsed through the Congress. Impeachment's a process basically where you can bring to account a president for their behaviour, and also if it's approved by both houses you can actually remove them from office. That never occurred, but the first case, there were actually 2 allegations against him. One was for an abuse of power, where effectively you could say that he was looking for the weaponization of the law himself. He was looking, with the help of the Ukraine, to dig dirt into Joe Biden and into Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. The second accusation against him for the first impeachment was basically that he was impeding Congress with some subpoenas which were required from him. The second time that this happened, again I discussed this with the tweet, what was going through his mind was incitement for insurrection, where he was basically advocating people to show that unhappiness with what he claimed was a rigged count of the election, and to show up in numbers at Capitol and show their displeasure with force. Okay, on top of that, we've got a president who has recently had 34 convictions against him for the Stormy
Daniels affair. Yes.
Now, in fact, it's probably a little bit less salacious than it sounds, because the convictions were basically for the way the payments of the $130,000 hush money were paid and disclosed by Cohen.
It was basically a paperwork issue rather than the actual payment as such.
Yeah, well, no job is done till the paperwork is finished, as you know.
I've heard that.
That's right. That's written above many bathroom stalls.
Yeah.
Now let's have a look at what goes through the long-term strategy of Donald Trump, because it gives us an idea as to what sort of person he is, what's going on in his mind, and what he'll likely do again if he gets into office this time around. Elections in November, but early voting for some states as early as September.
That's right.
Do you know that?
Yep.
So we're in July now, but this is coming around really, really quickly. Don't kid yourselves. Trump has been very vocal regarding NATO. Now, of the 31 countries in NATO, the United States at the moment contributes about 68% of the budget. Now, I thought the Marshall Plan, the rescue of Europe from the Second World War by the US, was over some 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Apparently not. It was in fact Obama who suggested a floor of 2% of GDP be paid by each contributing nation of NATO. Now, the reason why this is a big deal is they're basically packing themselves in Europe, okay? There's a war at their doorsteps. My family's Hungarian. Ukraine is very, very close to Hungary. In fact, it shares a border.
Yep.
I can understand why there's that quake. I can understand why Poland is the largest investor per GDP in Europe for their defence. They've seen this all before, one time too many. And Hungary's quite high up there as well. let me just say. Now, when asked, I believe it was by France, if he would in fact defend Europe if one of those countries was attacked by Russia, he basically said, we'll see. It depends on the contribution of your GDP towards the defence. Nobody gets a free ride. Now,
And rightly so.
I hasten to add, Article 5 does invoke responsibility to come to the aid of a member of the treaty who is attacked, but it doesn't specify that they have to do so militarily. So it actually is possibly within his rights to have said that. Very interesting. Israel. Where does Trump stand on Israel? Well, he's always defended the sovereignty of Israel and the policies of the Israeli government. It was a big show of confidence and identity for the ontological right of Israel to exist, for him to recognise Jerusalem as the capital, and for him also to move the US embassy to Jerusalem as well. Further to that, he was a big part of the Abraham Accords.
Very much so. And he's so unrecognised for, basically bringing peace single-handedly to the Middle East. I mean, seriously.
Well, certainly what happened in October with Hamas and Israel likely would not have happened if Trump was there. I'll argue that because
Completely so.
they're effectively financed through Iran, and effectively he was strangling the circulation of cash to Iran by forbidding other countries to trade with Iran and inject them with the cash. On top of that, he's also recognised the Golan Heights, taken in war by Israel in the late 1960s, and he's also basically assented to the increased occupation of the West Bank by Israel. That's where he stands there. Whether you agree or not, that's the sort of future that we have with Trump. I happen to agree.
Yeah, but we have to keep in mind that Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights would not have happened back then had Israel not been attacked from
Egypt,
all sides
Egypt.
at the time.
Egypt has been integrated a lot more now with the relationship with the United States and Israel, so the politics have changed there as well. Future defence plans, so we can see Trump moving away from Europe and moving increasingly towards the Indo-Pacific. Now, as an Australian,
aren't we glad of that?
that's something that I support for sure. So we can sense it here, okay? We've got lots of joint exercises happening up there in Darwin. We are now integrated into the security arrangement with the Five Eyes. So that's basically the Anglophile world.
That's right.
You know, England, UK, Canada. US, New
Zealand. That's
the
right.
Native
And now-
English-speaking countries.
And now the latest of all, of course, is AUKUS.
That's right, AUKUS. So Australia has been promised access to American nuclear submarine technology.
Yes.
We're waiting to see how that filters down. Now, looking at the long-term strategies, we've got a person here who can enter the ring. He can jump in the boxing ring and he can inspire confidence with the people who've put the money down on him. Not only that, but like a Mike Tyson, he can inspire fear on the people who are rubbing shoulders with him and against him. Now, I'm naming people like Chairman Xi. I'm naming people like Putin. I'm naming lesser figures like Kim Jong-un, who, let's not forget, is a nuclear power and is on the doorstep of Seoul, one of the largest, most important cities in terms of defence integration in the Indo-Pacific.
Yep.
The difference between him and Biden is he knows his people personally. He can pick up the phone and talk to them. Now, in terms of defence going forward, when interviewed, particularly regarding what he'd do with the war in Ukraine, this was the debate with Biden.
Yeah.
He refused to say it. Now, we're going to have a separate video on the debate. So have a look at that. We'll have some fun with that together and we'll share a beer with you. But effectively, he says that once he's appointed as president-elect, that is before he actually steps into office, he will have that war finished. Now, to do that, there's going to have to be some compromise made. He's not said what that compromise will be. Effectively, what's on the table is we're looking at basically saying that he would have to stop the expansion of NATO into Ukraine and further. There would have to be an end to the increasing eastern encroachment of NATO.
This
Russia.
is what Putin has been advocating
Sure.
for their own personal security reasons
Yeah.
for decades.
And effectively, that is the reason that Trump believes has started the war in the Ukraine. And frankly, Trump is sick of funding it. He's sick of financing that war.
And I'm sure that the American people are too.
I'm sure that they are. Now, speaking to you, Seuss, as an ex-soldier, and myself as well as an ex-soldier, we're all for peace. We're all for the end of war, because the only people who understand what happens in war and the machinations of war better than a politician
Is soldiers.
That's right.
They're the ones that are on the receiving end of those bullets.
And not only that, have trained with bullets and guns and understand that these things aren't toys and they're designed to destroy human bodies. And that's it. That's
Correct.
what that's about.
Yep.
So we're seeing a shift further away from Europe and more towards the Indo-Pacific. We're seeing a lot more defence relations with Australia, but we're also seeing a lot more of a person who is advancing America's interests first. So let's look, for example, previously, before he came into power, was a NAFTA trade agreement. That's changed under the first regime of Trump to the USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. So he was looking to protect American jobs, American industry. Specifically, if we had to pick one of them, we'd look at automotive. I'm guessing steel would be part of that as well.
Not to mention energy. They were totally independent energy. In fact, they were one of the largest suppliers of oil, exporters of oil to the world. And then, whatever his name is, I forgot it now, but it'll come back to me.
Yeah.
Biden,
Good old Biden.
changed it. As in, completely scrapped it.
Yeah, I mean, energy security, I guess, is slightly different to the character of Trump, but Trump acknowledges that Europe really has created a problem for itself in cutting off the energy supply for Russia. They're no longer energy secure. They're relying, in fact, on LPG, etc., from America.
That's right.
Not only that, but they're importing a lot through, I think, Belgium and the Netherlands, who backhandedly are getting their fuel through Russia. So effectively are financing the war against Russia and the war on Russia's side.
That's right.
At the same time, so it's a little bit of a scandal. You've got to say with Trump that he's a man who wears his heart on his sleeve. You can see what's going through his mind at any time. Usually it is some grievance or grudge that he's nursing. But he's a man who is independently wealthy and doesn't have to be in the game for the money. In fact, the salary that has been paid to him, he has had to accept that on the books, but it has been paid to charity each year that he's received those funds.
And I believe he's the only one that's ever done that.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly have the ex-Hungarian wrestler, Jesse the Body Ventura, as a state governor who used to do something similar to that as well.
Yep.
But it certainly is a flex of power if you're able to do that.
But it makes you wonder, though, doesn't it? I mean, yes, he's independently wealthy. He's a rich man. He's nobody's fool.
We don't know just how rich he is, but sure.
Yeah. However, the other presidents and politicians within the American system who are on a fixed wage, they're on a fixed wage.
Yeah.
However much that it may be a lot to us, but they're on a fixed wage. And yet, over their time in politics, have become multi-millionaires.
Yeah, look, so certainly we're talking about the weaponization of the law against Trump. And I brought up, I think, as well, him to some extent weaponizing the law as well against his foes. So, for example, the threats he had with Hillary Clinton when she was standing against him, that in fact he would imprison her, that he would have a look at the private government information that was kept on email servers.
That's right, on her personal
and
servers.
And those servers were destroyed, oddly enough. With
oddly,
assets.
yeah. How coincidental.
Or, in fact, with the first impeachment, what was levied against him was effectively that he was trying to find dirt on Joe and Hunter Biden. So everybody has got a lot to lose and a lot to hide.
Are you talking about that laptop?
So a very polarizing figure. If I can end on saying it this way, this is a man who people love to hate and hate to love. But he's a man who, if you had to have someone step in the ring against someone like Chairman Xi, someone who you'd be confident on backing, and someone who you knew would confidently be able to be on first name basis with men's men, masculine men, and I say that not only because of the fact that they wield power, but their identity in part is built upon their ability to flex power.
Oh, yes.
That's the ontological understanding, that's the existence of him, his existential makeup. This is the man that you would back. Now, for our deconstruction on the debate against Biden, stay with us for the next video and give us a thumbs up and a like.
Because provided you keep doing that, we'll keep making them. And I'm going to have a beer while we think about the next video.
You know you want to.
Catch you on the next one.